Medieval peasants were smarter than modern farmers. While we obsess over cattle, they knew a secret about livestock that we've completely forgotten. This one creature gave them meat, milk, leather, and something else cows never could. Why did we abandon it? Owning a cow in medieval England? That was like buying a Tesla today. On a fast food salary, a single cow cost around 10 shillings. Sounds cheap, right? Wrong. That was 6 months of wages for a regular laborer. 6 months. You'd be eating dirt and drinking rainwater just to afford one animal. But here's where it gets worse. Cows are needy, really needy. Each one demands 2 to 3 acres of grazing land. And peasants? Most of them work tiny strips totaling maybe 15 to 30 acres, land they didn't even own. Their lord did. So good luck convincing Sir Fancy Pants to let your cow munch on his grass. Then winter hits. Your cow needs hay, mountains of it, which means you need a barn to store that hay. Barns cost money. Money you spent on the cow you can't feed. See the problem? The numbers don't lie. By the 13th century, only about 10% of English peasants owned even one cow. 10%. That's like saying only one kid in your classroom gets dessert. The rest just watch. And those lucky few who did have cattle? They often shared them between multiple families. Your neighbor milks on Monday, you milk on Tuesday. It was basically medieval timeshare, except instead of a beach condo, you're splitting a moody, hay-guzzling animal that might die come February. So what did everyone else do? They got clever. Peasants figured out that smaller animals with lower maintenance costs could actually outperform cattle in almost every way that mattered. More meat per acre, more products per animal, less risk of financial ruin. The pig was about to change everything. And honestly, cows never stood a chance. Pigs were basically medieval garbage disposals with legs. Throw them your rotten turnips? Gone. Leftover porridge? Demolished. That mystery slop behind the cottage? A pig would eat it and ask for seconds. They even ate human waste. Yeah, we're not going to dwell on that one. The point is, pigs cost nothing to feed. Zero. Zilch. While your neighbor's cow was demanding acres of grass and mountains of winter hay, your pig was out there turning literal garbage into bacon. That's not just efficient. That's magic. But here's what really made pigs the ultimate peasant hack. One sow could pump out 8 to 12 piglets, twice a year. Do the math. That's potentially 24 new pigs from a single animal annually. Meanwhile, your cow's over there producing one calf per year like some kind of underachiever. And the speed? Ridiculous. A piglet went from squealing newborn to slaughter weight in 6 to 8 months. You could barely teach a medieval child to hold a spoon in that time. Now let's talk efficiency. Pigs convert food into meat at roughly 35%. Cows, 6%. That means for every 100 pounds of food, you're getting 35 pounds of pig meat versus 6 pounds of beef. I've never been great at math, but even I can see who's winning here. Then autumn rolled around. This was pannage season. Lords actually let peasants release their pigs into the forests to gorge on fallen acorns and beechnuts. Free food provided by nature, supervised by nobody. Your pig basically went on an all-inclusive vacation and came back fat. Once slaughtered, the meat practically preserved itself. Salted pork, smoked bacon, food that lasted entire winters. But pigs weren't the only secret weapon. Chickens were paying rent. Eggs weren't just food. They were currency. Peasants literally paid their lords in eggs. 20, 30, sometimes more per week. Miss a payment? That's a problem. Your landlord didn't accept excuses. He accepted eggs. So every peasant cottage had chickens scratching around. These birds needed almost nothing. A tiny coop, some scraps, maybe a corner of the rafters to roost in at night. That was it. Now modern hens pump out over 300 eggs yearly. Medieval chickens, 80 to 120. Sounds pathetic, right? But here's the thing. Those birds did it without special feed, heated barns, or artificial lighting, just sunshine and whatever bugs they found, and peasants got creative with the math. Keep 5 or 6 hens, and suddenly you've got eggs to pay rent and eggs to eat. Maybe even extras to trade at market for salt or iron nails. Not bad for animals that basically fed themselves by pecking around the yard. Then there's the fertilizer situation. Chicken manure runs hot, nitrogen-packed. Medieval farmers figured out that spreading it on vegetable gardens made everything grow faster and bigger. Your cabbages? Massive. Your onions? Could knock a man unconscious. Okay, slight exaggeration, but the point stands. Roosters pulled double duty too. No church bells in your village, no sundial, no problem. That rooster screaming at dawn was your alarm clock. Annoying? Absolutely. Effective? Completely. When hens got too old to lay, they didn't go to waste. Tough old birds went straight into the pot. Pottage. That's the soupy stew peasants survived on. Vegetables, grains, whatever meat you had. An old hen simmered for hours, turned into something edible, but chickens weren't the loudest security system around. Geese were terrifying. Geese were basically medieval attack dogs, with wings and attitude problems. You think I'm joking? Roman geese famously saved the capital from invasion by honking at approaching Gauls. Medieval peasants knew this trick too. Plant a few geese near your cottage, and no stranger gets within 50 feet without the whole village knowing. These birds held grudges. Seriously, cross a goose once, and it remembered your face. Forever. Your ankles would never be safe again. But here's where it gets interesting. Those angry feathered demons also produced something incredibly valuable. Feathers. Goose down stuffed mattresses and pillows. Now, peasants mostly slept on straw. Itchy, bug-infested straw. But goose feathers? That was luxury. And luxury sold. A peasant woman could pluck her geese several times yearly without killing them, then trade those feathers at market for actual money. Then there's the fat situation. Goose fat rendered down into this golden, multi-purpose miracle substance. Waterproof your boots? Goose fat? Fry your onions? Goose fat? Chest cold making you miserable? Rub some goose fat on there. I'm not saying it worked. I'm saying they believed it worked. Sometimes that's enough. And the feeding costs? Basically nothing. Geese ate grass, weeds, pond scum, stuff growing in ditches that even pigs ignored. Give them access to water and some open ground, they handled the rest themselves. September 29th was Michaelmas, Goose Day. Peasants fattened their best birds all summer, then handed them over as rent payment. Lords expected it, demanded it, actually. Goose quills became writing instruments too. Every monastery, every court document, every love letter some nobleman wrote, written with peasant-supplied feathers. But geese weren't the only animals turning worthless land into profit. Sheep did something even more impressive. England didn't just raise sheep. England was built on sheep. By the 13th century, wool exports accounted for nearly half the crown's revenue. Half. That's not an agricultural product. That's an entire economic system walking around on four legs. But here's what most people miss. Peasants rarely owned sheep outright. They couldn't afford to. Instead, they worked deals. A lord provided the flock. A peasant family did the backbreaking work of actually caring for them. In return, they kept a portion of the lambs born each spring. Sounds unfair, probably was. But it gave landless families access to wealth they'd never touch otherwise. And sheep weren't picky eaters. Far from it. Those rocky hillsides too steep for plowing? Perfect sheep country? The scrubby moorland lords considered worthless? Sheep paradise. These animals literally converted garbage terrain into money. One sheep gave you 2 to 4 pounds of raw wool annually. Doesn't sound like much until you consider this. Women spent entire winters spinning that wool into thread. Thread became cloth. Cloth meant income during months when nothing else earned a penny. Then there's the milk situation. Sheep milk contains nearly twice the fat of cow's milk. That extra richness meant harder cheeses. Cheeses that lasted for months without rotting. In an age before refrigeration, that wasn't convenience. That was survival. And lanolin, that greasy substance coating raw wool, peasants rubbed it into cracked hands and weather-beaten faces, worked it into leather to keep boots waterproof. Medieval hand lotion, basically. Smelled terrible, worked brilliantly. Sheep provided wool, milk, cheese, and skincare, all from animals grazing land nobody else wanted. But sheep weren't the only creature turning limitations into advantages. Goats did something even craftier. Goats were the con artists of the medieval farmyard, and I mean that as a compliment. While cows demanded prime pastures and careful feeding, goats ate the scenery, literally. Thorny brambles, delicious. Woody shrubs, fantastic. Tree bark that would send a cow to an early grave, goat dessert. Here's what made them ridiculous. A goat needed roughly 1/10 the grazing space of a cow. 1/10. That's not an advantage. That's basically cheating. And the milk kept flowing. Cows dried up after about 6 months of lactation. Goats, 10 months. Nearly year-round dairy from an animal the size of a large dog. A single nanny goat pumped out 2 to 3 quarts daily, enough for a family of 4 to have milk, cheese, and leftovers to trade. My grandmother kept goats well into the 1960s for this exact reason. Cheaper than a cow, she said. Meaner, too. She wasn't wrong about the attitude. Medieval doctors actually prescribed goat milk for sick patients and young children. They believed it digested easier than cow's milk. Modern science proved them right, by the way. The fat globules are smaller. Sometimes medieval wisdom wasn't just superstition, but here's the part that connected goats to power itself. Goat skin became vellum. That smooth, durable writing surface you've seen in old manuscripts. Goat hide. The Magna Carta, written on goat skin. Royal proclamations, church documents, legal contracts, all of it. Peasants raising goats weren't just producing milk, they were supplying the raw material for medieval bureaucracy. Not bad for an animal everyone considered the poor man's cow. Speaking of animals lords tried keeping for themselves, rabbits had an even stranger story. One involving smuggling, secret hutches, and Norman control freaks. Rabbits weren't supposed to belong to peasants. The Normans made sure of that. When William the Conqueror showed up in 1066, his nobles brought rabbits along like exotic pets. Except these pets came with rules, harsh ones. Lords built artificial warrens, fancy underground burrow systems with dedicated warreners guarding them. Rabbit meat was for noble tables only. Peasants caught poaching faced fines that could destroy a family for years. But here's the thing about rabbits. They breed like, well, rabbits. One breeding pair can theoretically produce 50 offspring in a single year. 50. That's not farming. That's an invasion. Controlling that kind of reproduction was like trying to stop gossip in a small village. Impossible. So peasants poached constantly. They snared them, netted them, trained dogs to flush them from hedgerows. The risk was worth it because rabbit meat packed more protein per pound than beef. And unlike pork, you didn't need salt to keep it fresh for a few days. By the 1300s, something sneaky started happening. Peasants began keeping rabbits in hidden hutches, behind cottages, in root cellars, under hay piles, secret breeding operations that lords couldn't easily discover. My history professor called this the first underground economy. I call it people being people. The fur mattered too. Rabbit pelts weren't worth much individually, but they added up. Lined winter hoods, stuffed into boots for warmth, sold at market when coin ran desperately short, and the rabbits kept breeding, despite every law, despite every punishment. Within 2 centuries, rabbit keeping transformed from noble privilege to common practice. The lords lost that battle completely. Speaking of animals the nobility hoarded, ducks and doves had their own class warfare playing out in medieval courtyards. Ducks were the unsung heroes of the medieval vegetable garden. While chickens scratched around looking pretty, ducks hunted. Slugs, snails, beetles, larvae, all those crop-destroying pests that kept peasants awake at night. Duck breakfast. And here's what most people don't realize. Duck eggs are bigger than chicken eggs, about 30% larger on average. They also contain more fat, which made them perfect for baking those dense, heavy breads that actually filled your stomach. But ducks weren't the controversial poultry. Doves were. Lords built elaborate dovecotes, tall stone towers housing 500 birds or more, sometimes 1,000. These structures produced squabs year-round, fresh meat in January, fresh meat in March, fresh meat whenever his lordship fancied it. Peasants, they got nothing, except the privilege of watching doves eat their grain. That's right, the lord's doves flew wherever they pleased, landing in peasant fields, gorging on freshly planted seeds, and complaining about it could get you in serious trouble. So peasants fought back quietly. Traps hidden in hedgerows, nets strung between trees at dusk, snares baited with grain. If a dove happened to wander too far from the dovecote, well, accidents happen. Now here's where it gets truly absurd. Pigeon droppings were so valuable that lords legally owned them. The manure. From birds that ate peasant grain, the nitrogen content made it incredible fertilizer worth real money. Some lords actually stationed guards at their dovecotes just to protect the bird poop. My grandmother would have called that highway robbery with extra steps. Between duck eggs and stolen doves, peasants scraped together protein however they could. But raising animals was only half the survival equation. Working the land required muscle that human backs couldn't provide alone. Horses were for knights, full stop. A decent horse cost about 80 shillings in medieval England. That's nearly 4 years of wages for a common laborer. And here's the kicker. Horses needed oats, expensive, carefully cultivated oats that peasants couldn't spare from their own hungry mouths. So what pulled the plow? Oxen. Slower than horses, sure, but oxen had something better. Endurance. A team of oxen could drag a heavy wooden plow through sticky clay soil for 12, sometimes 14 hours straight. Horses? They'd collapse after 6. My grandfather used to say slow and steady wins the race. He was talking about oxen, and the strength difference might surprise you. Oxen pulled with roughly 50% more sustained power than horses. They didn't sprint. They pushed, hour after hour, furrow after furrow, until the job got done. But here's where medieval peasants got clever. Nobody owned a complete farming operation. One family had an ox. Another owned the plow. A third contributed the harness. They formed teams, pooling resources across households. Cooperative farming born from poverty. Then there were donkeys. Smaller, cheaper, tougher. A donkey ate whatever grew alongside roads. Thistles, rough grass, scrub brush, feed that would insult a horse. Yet donkeys carried 20 to 30% of their body weight up mountain paths too narrow for any cart. Perfect pack animals for peasants hauling goods to market. And nothing got wasted. When an ox finally died after 10 or 15 years of loyal service, that tough old meat-filled stew pots, the hide became leather. Even worn-out animals contributed. But raising animals and working fields only solved part of the survival puzzle. What happened to the parts most people threw away? Nothing got thrown away. Nothing. When a pig died, peasants used parts that would make modern butchers squeamish. The bladder? That became a waterproof bag. Sometimes kids inflated them for village football games. Medieval children literally played sports with pig organs. My grandmother used to say, "Waste not, want not." Medieval peasants took that advice to extreme levels. Animal bones became tools, buttons, needles, dice for gambling, even handles for knives and awls. A skilled peasant could carve a single ox bone into a dozen useful items. Nothing fancy, but everything functional. Then there's the intestines. Sounds disgusting, right? But cleaned and scraped, intestines transformed into perfect sausage casings. Peasants stuffed them with whatever meat scraps remained, added salt and herbs, then smoked them over hearth fires. Those sausages lasted through entire winters. Protein storage without refrigeration. And tallow. Here's where it gets clever. Rendered animal fat made candles, made soap, waterproof boots, treated wooden tools. One bucket of tallow served about 15 different household purposes. Peasants couldn't afford beeswax candles like the wealthy. Tallow burned smokier, smelled worse, but cost absolutely nothing beyond the animal they'd already slaughtered. Horns from goats and cattle became drinking cups, powder containers, musical instruments. Some peasants carved decorative patterns into horn cups that rivaled anything craftsmen sold at market. But here's the part that might turn your stomach. Blood. Every last drop got collected during slaughter. Mixed with oats, onions, and fat, it became black pudding. Dense, protein-rich, surprisingly tasty when fried crispy. Medieval peasants survived because they saw value where others saw garbage. Every animal gave twice. Once while living, once after death. That philosophy built civilizations.